Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in today's video, I'm going to be comparing two of what many people consider to be the best dual overdrive pedals. So as many of you know, I am an avid King of Tone user. I've been using one since I got my first one back in 2013. And what I love about it is that it works so well with any amp and any guitar combination. However, these days there's a 4-year wait list. They're really hard to get your hands on unless you want to spend like over $1,000, which kind of makes them a little bit less of an option. But one pedal I'm seeing literally everywhere is the Browne Amplification Protein. I did a poll on my Instagram a few weeks ago asking which dual overdrive pedal you were most interested in, and the Protein came out on top by far. So I went ahead and purchased one, and I spent about the last week playing around with it, learning it, and really comparing it with the King of Tone that I'm used to. Now, I think it's important to note that these two pedals are not trying to do the same thing. Both are based on very different circuits, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video, but that's just important to remember. Now, a comparison video between these two pedals, it's not really anything new. People have done it before, but I feel like when you're listening to demos and you're trying to make an informed purchase, it's important to hear that piece of gear in different contexts, because not only can different guitars and amps make a difference, but the way someone plays can make the sounds of an overdrive pedal vary wildly. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be going over the differences between the King of Tone and the Protein. We'll be talking about the differences between the circuits and what they're both trying to achieve. But then to make sure you guys get more of a complete picture, we're going to be testing these pedals with my amp, but we're also going to be testing it with the Universal Audio Dream. So if you're a guitar player that doesn't use a traditional amplifier, maybe you're a worship player, then you can kind of get an idea of how these pedals are going to sound with your ampless setup. And also, I think it is important to hear how a pedal interacts with different amps. Even though the Universal Audio Dream and the Dr. Z EZ-G50 are both trying to do Fendery things, they sound really different, and that's obviously going to affect the sound of the pedals. So without further ado, I'm going to grab my guitar and we're going to get into it. Okay, so the Analogman King of Tone is essentially a heavily modified blues breaker circuit. And while the Protein has two different circuits on either side of the pedal, the red and yellow side of the King of Tone are both the same circuit. So essentially what it is it's two individual identical pedals put side by side. The way you get your little bit of variance and why there are two channels is because there are dip switches inside that allow you to change each side between clean, overdrive, and distortion. The way I have mine set up is overdrive on the red side, so on the right side here, and then I've got clean set up on the left side. So even though they're identical circuits, on the clean side, they actually remove the clipping from the pedal. So with the overdrive, you've got soft clipping, and then with the clean side, it's the same circuit, just with no clipping. Alternatively, if you wanted to turn it to distortion mode, which I would personally never use, then you get hard clipping. Now, that's not to say this yellow side can't get dirty as well. It gets its kind of own version of overdrive, which I'll show you in a second, but that's basically what this pedal is trying to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you some sounds now. All right, so on my switcher, when it is set to B, this red light here, we are gonna be going through my amp, and when it is set to A, so the green side here, we will be going through the Dream. So let's start off with the amp, clean, it sounds like this. Now this is typically how I have the King of Tone set. So let's just go through and listen to how it sounds. If we back off the tone, we get this. Next, we'll listen to the gain range of the overdrive, so straight up. For me, the sweet spot is about noon. If you have the low gain version, then maybe you have to put it somewhere around there. But it sounds best to me right here. And then you just find unity gain. Okay, so moving over to the clean side or the yellow side, it's essentially gonna sound the same. It's just gonna have a little bit less compression and obviously less clipping. I'll show you my clean tone first. So same thing, I'll show you the range of the tone knob. For me, again, I found the sweet spot is always straight up and down, and then you just kind of make your little adjustments from there. So instead to clean, this side actually has a lot more volume on tap than the overdrive side, but we can crank up the drive like this. We'll have to make sure to bring down the volume to compensate. It's kind of a cool sound. I find it to be maybe a little bit on the shrill side. The King of Tone in general is a bit of an unrefined tone. It's kind of like how I like to describe it. There's not a lot of compression or forgiveness there. It's very revealing pedal. And for the drive here, I found the sweet spot to be up here. Now you can set the drive quite low and have it be a very clean boost. So let's just find our unity gain. Okay, so there's a bit of a boost, and you can hear how it changes a little bit of the tonal characteristic of the guitar. It's not like this flat, clean dB boost. So you're gonna get a little bit of a bass cut and a little bit of a mid boost, a little bit of treble and sparkle on top. It sounds great, so it's gonna sound like this. Before we get into stacking the two sides, it's important to note there are two little dials on the inside of the pedal if you open it up. The internal dials are really going to affect the frequencies even higher than those treble frequencies. So that means you have to be very careful about tweaking it. It's a very sensitive dial. The way that I have mine set is I have it just up a hair. I mean, I'm typically using single coil pickups, but I like that little bit of a sparkly kind of boost on the top. But if I was playing primarily with humbuckers or with a darker sounding guitar, then you really want to make sure you go in there and tweak that. I've talked to a few people who haven't really bonded with the King of Tone because they found it to be a little too warm, a little too dark. But if you spend some time with those internal dials, kind of tweaking them to get them right, then I guarantee you can get a good sound out of this pedal with any guitar and amp combination. All right, so the way that many people will use the King of Tone when they stack it up is essentially to have kind of two channels, right? So you have your main overdrive here, maybe that you're using for rhythm or some of the leads that you kind of don't want to stand out too much. Then you kick on the clean boost after, and it makes that part jump out a little bit more. Okay, so overdrive on its own. So you can hear this tone is really about cutting through the mix and getting out in front of the band. On its own and out of context here, it's a little bit on the harsh side, but when you fit it into a mix, it really cuts through and sounds very sweet. I think the important thing with getting a good stacked overdrive tone is making sure that you're careful with your tone knobs and very diligent about setting those correctly. Same with the internal dials as well. Obviously, if you're boosting some very high frequencies and then you're stacking those boosted frequencies on top of each other, they can get out of control really quick, which you don't want. But if you spend a little bit of time with it, you can definitely find a very good sound. With that said, I think the King of Tone is at its best when it is used as a lighter overdrive. So when your settings aren't crazy and you're not trying to get a ton of gain from it, this is because the type of overdrive you're gonna get from it is very uncompressed. You'll notice that it is very responsive to your pick attack, which obviously is a good thing because you're gonna have maximum dynamic range, but it also can reveal some kind of negative intricacies about your playing as well. So you gotta watch out for that. Okay, so now we're gonna jump over to the Protein, and I'm very excited about this because honestly, overdrive pedals haven't really gotten me excited in a long time. And that's just because I got the King of Tone so early on, and anything that I put against it, I just didn't really like it as much. The Protein is the first overdrive pedal that I would confidently put on a pedal board instead of the King of Tone and feel like I'm not lacking anything in terms of quality. Where the difference really lies is in the circuits. These two pedals are not trying to do the same thing. So what you end up with is two very different, or I guess four very different versions of good. Now what the Protein is doing is on the right side, we've got the green side, and this is based on a Nobel's ODR1. This is a very famous overdrive in the Nashville country music scene. And to my ears, it tends to always be a little bit more on the compressed side, and it's got a very woolly bottom end. While it doesn't have a ton of mid-range like a clon or a tube screamer, I still wouldn't call it transparent, I think because of that low mid and low end woolliness. And this is what makes this circuit kind of polarizing. People either kind of love it or they hate it. Now on the other side, we've got the blue side, and this is based on, I believe it's a Keeley modded BD2, so a Keeley modded Boss Blues driver. It's specifically kind of trying to nail that John Mayer Continuum album tone. And while the green side sounds nothing like the King of Tone, I would say this blue side does sound like the King of Tone a little bit. They're definitely in the same ballpark, but the blue side of the Protein, it has less mid-range and it actually has more low end and a little bit more compression. So you're not gonna feel as much of that dynamic range. Okay, so we'll start off on the green side. Again, we'll get our clean tone. This is through the amp. So right away you can hear how thick this overdrive is. And because it's so thick, I think that's why it agrees with the whole country sound a lot, because you're gonna be using thinner pickups, right? You're gonna be using your bridge pickup on a Strat or a Tele. And so that low end woolliness is gonna sound good. So here's the bridge pickup. Okay, so I'll jump back to the neck pickup just for the sake of comparison. Let's go through the knobs. So tone, I found it's a little bit dark sounding. There's a fair bit of drive on tap here, so if we bring that down. We'll just check the range of the level as well. I'm actually a really big fan of that sound. It's very usable. Now we'll hop over to the blue side, and this is the part of the Protein that people especially seem to love. I believe Browne Amplification also makes a standalone version of this side, so if you really just like the blue side, you can just get that pedal and you don't have to worry about the green side. But let's start with our clean tone. Okay, so obviously it really doesn't sound anything like the green side here. It's got a very flat EQ curve. There's plenty of low end. But we get a good amount of sparkle on the top. So I can see why people like this as like an always on overdrive, kind of like a tone colorer. Because when you back the gain down, even for a clean tone, it sounds really cool. Now, I believe I read somewhere that the gain knob actually affects your treble frequencies quite a bit. So when the gain is lower, you can actually bump the tone up higher. But as you increase the gain on this side, you get more high end. So then you want to bring the tone down a little bit. So let's just listen to the range. We'll start with the tone knob. I'll kind of start it in a reasonable spot with the gain and the level. So that's a pretty substantial range on this thing. If we bring the gain down, so as we play around with the gain, maybe we'll look at the tone too. So we bring the gain down. So when I have the gain almost all the way down on this side, you can see I have to pretty much max out the tone knob, but you're probably not going to be using it that way anyway, so it's not really going to matter. As we bring the gain back up, I kind of like it almost at noon, and then I bring the treble back or the tone back a little bit, and then you kind of find unity with the volume. So you can hear it's really trying to do its own thing. It's definitely similar to the King of Tone, but it really is not the same. One great feature of the Protein is stacked up. It sounds just awesome. So if we get the blue and the green side going at the same time with kind of reasonable settings here, we get this. So clean. Now that is a very usable high gain tone. So it might even save you a spot, right? If you need something that does do high gain, this thing sounds awesome. Let's just check the bridge pickup as well. Okay, so now we're gonna listen to some back and forth comparisons between the King of Tone and the Protein. Really what we wanna compare is the red side to the blue side, because I'd say those are kind of the closest to each other in terms of tone and feel. Okay, so here we go with the blue side of the Protein. Okay, so that should give you a little bit of an idea of how the two pedals differ. Next up, let's just try switching between the amp and the Dream 65 just to kind of hear how it sounds with those. So here's what the amp sounds like clean. And the Dream. So a very different sound, right? Both Fender-y, but definitely very different. So here's how the pedals sound with the Dream. So to me, what I hear, especially when I go over to the Dream, is that the Protein sounds like very hi-fi and more refined. And for a lot of people, this is gonna be the tone that you wanna seek after. I feel like the King of Tone has a little bit more vibe. It's unrefined, right? It's a little bit rattier. It's not got as much compression. It's not quite as sweet sounding, but it's got like some mojo. And I think the actual Overdrive characteristic is something that I prefer just a little bit. Okay, so last up, I've grabbed a guitar with humbuckers, and we're just gonna take a listen to how that affects the sound. So here's our clean tone with the amp. And with the Dream. So you can hear, obviously, these are driving those a little bit harder, so they're not quite as clean, but I don't really want to change anything. So let's listen to the pedals. Okay, so obviously we can spend all day just going through tones, trying different combinations and things like that, but I hope this at least gave you like a good representation of what each pedal can do. Like I said, they're really not trying to do the same thing. I'm not gonna say like, hey, if you can't get your hands on a King of Tone, then your next best option is gonna be the Protein, because it really is trying to do something different. I will say again, this is the first time that I've ever had another Overdrive where I'm very sure I'm not gonna get rid of it and it's gonna see a lot of use. And that is coming from someone who is a full-blown King of Tone enthusiast. It has been my main pedal for literally almost 10 years. And while the Protein doesn't nail the exact tone of the King of Tone, it is an outstanding alternative, and I think a lot of people would honestly even choose the Protein over the King of Tone. At the end of the day, it's just gonna depend on what tone you're going for and what you like the most. I believe you can get a brand new version 3 Protein like this for something like $319 US, where a King of Tone is only $275, but obviously you're gonna be dealing with that 4-year long wait list to get a King of Tone, unless you wanna pay $1,000, $1,200 to get one now. So I'd like to know from you, what did you think about the differences between the Protein and the King of Tone? Were you surprised at how different they sounded? Do you feel like one was significantly better than the other? And also, what other overdrives do you think that somebody trying to go after these tones would like? Please leave that down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you give it a thumbs up, and please also subscribe to the channel for more weekly guitar content. And with all that said, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one.